Hello, my name is Victoria Ellis, and I'll be reading Stanley in Space. Chapter 1, The Call. It was Saturday morning, and Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop were putting up wallpaper in the kitchen. "Isn't this nice, George?" said Mrs. Lambchop, stirring paste. No excitement, a perfect usual day. Mr. Lambchop knew what she meant. Excitement was often troublesome. The flatness of their son Stanley, for example, after his big bulletin board settled on him overnight. Exciting, but worrying too, till Stanley got round again. And that genie visiting, granting wishes. Oh, very exciting, but all the wishes had to be unwished before the genie returned to the lamp from which he sprung. "Yes, dear," Mr. Lambchop smoothed down wallpaper. "Ordinary, the very best sort of day." In the living room, Stanley Lambchop and his younger brother Arthur were watching a Tom Toad cartoon on TV. The sporty toad was water skiing and fell off, making a great splash. Arthur laughed so hard he didn't hear the telephone, but Stanley answered it. "Lambchop residence," said the caller. "The President of the United States speaking. Who's this?" Stanley smiled. "The King of France." "They don't have kings in France, not anymore." "Excuse me, but I'm too busy for jokes." Stanley kept his eyes on TV. "My brother and I are watching the Tom Toad show." "Well, you keep watching, young fellow." The caller hung up just as Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop came in to watch the rest of the show. "Hey, guess what?" Stanley said. "Hay is for horses," said Mrs. Lambchop, mindful always of careful speech. "Who called, dear?" Stanley laughed. "The President of the United States." Arthur laughed too. Stanley said he was the King of France. Tom Toad vanished suddenly from the TV screen, and an American flag appeared. "We bring you a special message from the White House in Washington, D.C., said the deep voice of an announcer. "Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States." The screen showed the President looking very serious behind his desk. "My fellow Americans," said the President said, "I am sorry to interrupt this program, but someone out there doesn't realize that I am a very busy man who can't waste time joking on the telephone. I hope the particular person I am talking to, and I do not mean the King of France, will remember that. Thank you. Now here's the Toad Show again." Tom Toad, still water skiing, came back on the TV. "Stanley!" exclaimed Mrs. Lambchop. "The King of France, indeed." "Gosh," Arthur said. "Will Stanley get put in jail?" "There is no law against being a telephone smarty," Mr. Lambchop said. "Perhaps there should be." The telephone rang, and he answered it. "George Lambchop here." "Good." It was the President. "I've been trying to get a hold of you." "Oh, my," Mr. Lambchop said. "Please excuse—" "Hold on. You're the fellow who has the boy was flat once. Got his picture in the newspaper?" "My son Stanley, Mr. President," Mr. Lambchop said, to let the others know who was calling. "I had to be sure," said the President. "We have to get together, Lambchop. I'll send my private plane right now, fetch you all here to Washington, D.C. Mr. Lambchop gasped. "Private plane? Washington? All of us?" "The whole family," the President chuckled, "including the King of France." Chapter 2, Washington. At the White House, in his famous Oval Office, the President shook hands with all of the Lambchops. "Thanks for coming," he chuckled. "Bet you never thought when you woke up this morning that you'd get to meet me." "Indeed not," Mr. Lambchop said. "This is quite a surprise." "Well, here's another one," said the President. "The reason I asked you to come—" He sat down behind his desk, serious now. "Tyra. Never heard of it, right?" The Lambchops all shook their heads. Nobody ever heard of it. "It's a planet up there, somewhere. They sent a message, the first ever from outer space." The Lambchops were greatly interested. "Imagine!" Mrs. Lambchop exclaimed. "What did it say?" "Very friendly tone," the President said. "Peaceful, just checking around. Ask us to visit. Now my plan—" A side door of the Oval Office had opened suddenly to reveal a nicely dressed lady wearing a crown. Mrs. Lambchop recognized her at once as the Queen of England. "About the banquet, also the—" The Queen began, and saw that the President was busy. "Oops, we beg your pardon." She closed the door. "This place is a madhouse," the President said. "Visitors, fancy dinners, no end to it. Now where— Ah, yes, the Star Scout." He leaned forward. "That's our new top-secret spaceship, just ready now. Send someone up in the Star Scout, I thought, to meet with these tyrants. But who? Wouldn't look peaceful to send soldiers or even scientists. Then I thought, what could be more peaceful than just an ordinary American boy?" The President smiled. "Why not Stanley Lambchop?" "Stanley?" Miss Lambchop gasped. "In a spaceship? To meet with an alien race?" "Oh, boy," said Stanley. "I would love to go." "Me too," said Arthur. "It's not fair if—" "Arthur!" Mr. Lambchop drew in a deep breath. "Mr. President, why Stanley?" "It has to be someone who's already had adventure experience," the President said. Well, my Secret Service showed me a newspaper story about when Stanley was flat and caught 2 robbers. Robbers! That's adventure. I had them too, Arthur said. A genie taught me to fly, and we had a lionfoot. A what? A lionfoot, Arthur said. Half lion, half elephant. They're nice. Is that right? The Secret Service never. Mr. President, Mrs. Lambchop did not like to interrupt, but her concern was great. Mr. President, she said, this mission, is it safe? My goodness, of course it's safe, the President said. We have taken great care, Mrs. Lambchop. The Star Scout has all the latest scientific equipment, and it has been very carefully tested. First, we tried it on the automatic pilot with no passengers. It worked perfectly. Even then, ma'am, we were not satisfied. We sent the Star Scout up again, this time with our cleverest trained bird abroad. But hear for yourself. The President spoke into a little box on his desk. Send in Dr. Schwartz, please. A bearded man entered, wearing a white coat and carrying a bird cage with a cloth over it. Bowing, he removed the cloth to reveal a large, brightly colored parrot. Thank you, Herman, the President said. Dr. Schwartz is our top space scientist, he told the Lambchops, and this is Polly, the bird I spoke of. Polly, tell the folks here about your adventure into space. Piece of cake, said the parrot. Terrific. Loved every minute of it. Thank you, Herman, the President said, and Dr. Schwartz carried Polly away. That was very reassuring, but it's out of the question for Stanley to go alone, Mrs. Lambchop said. However, we were planning a family vacation. Would it be possible, Mr. President, for all of us to go? Well, if you didn't mind the crowding, the President said, and skipping on baggage. Actually, we had in mind the seaside, Mr. Lambchop said, or tennis camp, but the Queen of England looked in again. May we ask if— Just a minute, for heaven's sake, said the President. We shall return in, and looking peeved, the Queen went away. Mr. Lambchop had decided. Mr. President, the seaside will keep. We will go to Tyra, sir. Wonderful, the President jumped up. To the stars, Lambchop. Some training at the Space Center, and you're on your way. Chapter 3, Taking Off. 10, said the voice of Mission Control. The countdown had begun. When it reached 0, Chief Pilot Stanley Lambchop would press the start button, and the Star Scout would blast off for Tyra. 9! Strapped in their seats, the Lambchops held their breaths, each thinking very different thoughts. Stanley was wondering if the Tyrans would mind that Earth had sent just an ordinary family. Suppose they were big stuck-ups and expected a general, or a TV star, or even the President. Suppose 8, said Control, and Stanley fixed his eyes on the panel before him. Mr. Lambchop was thinking that serving one's country was noble, but this was a bit much. How did these things happen? Off to an unknown planet, the entire family. Other families didn't have a son become flat. Other families didn't find genies in the house. Oh well, Mr. Lambchop sighed. 7, said Control. Mrs. Lambchop thought that Mr. Lambchop seemed fretful. But why, now that the Star Scout looks so nice? Thanks to her, in fact. They may call it a spaceship, she had said when she first saw it. But where's the space? Just one room, and all gray? Drab, I say. Much of the training at the Space Center, however, was physical, and Mrs. Lambchop, who jogged and exercised regularly, quickly passed the test required. In the days that followed, while the others were being made fit, she used her free time to make the Star Scout more like home. Only so much weight was permitted, but she managed a bathroom scale for the shower alcove and a plastic curtain, pretty shades for the portholes, a Venetian blind for the magnifying exploration window, and posters of Mexico and France. 6, 5, 4, 3. Mrs. Lambchop made sure her purse was snug beneath her seat. Arthur, by nature lazy, was thinking that he was glad to be done with all the jogging, jumping, climbing ladders, and scaling walls. When he was super strong, thanks to the genie, it would have been easy. But for just plain Arthur Lambchop, he thought, it was tiring. 2, said Control. Good luck, everybody. 1, pay attention, dear, Miss Lambchop told Stanley. 0, said Control, and Stanley pressed the start button. Vroom! Rocket soaring. The Star Scout rose from its launching pad. Vroom! Vroom! Gaining speed, it soared higher and higher, carrying the Lambchops toward the farthest where Tyra lay. Chapter 4, In Space. I'll just flip this omelet, said Mrs. Lambchop, making breakfast in the Star Scout, and then, oh dear! The omelet hovered like a frisbee in the air above her. Mostly, however, after weeks in space, the Lambchops remembered that gravity, the force that held things down, did not exist beyond Earth's atmosphere. Mr. Lambchop often read now with his hands clasped behind his head, allowing his book to float before him, and Stanley and Arthur greatly enjoyed pushing from their chairs to drift like feathers across the room. Raising her pan, Mrs. Lambchop brought down the omelet. After breakfast, what? She said. A game of Monopoly? Please, not again, Arthur sighed. If I'd known this adventure would be so boring, I'd never have come. The worst part, Stanley said, is not knowing how long it will last. The beginning wasn't boring, Arthur said as he began their breakfast. The beginning was fun. I'm going to stop now here, but thanks for reading.